A very good morning to all of you. Today's topic is about the resources for fresh water and water pollution. Yesterday we have discussed about the water resources, different sources for fresh water, and we have seen what are different water resources that can be used for the availability of water on the earth surface. Today we will discuss more about the resources for water resource and how we will see what are different kinds of pollutants, what are different types of water pollution, and what are the causes for that pollution. Okay. So this is the property of water. As we know that the formula for water is H2O. Okay. So this H2O is having two hydrogen atoms and one oxygen atoms. Okay. The hydrogen atoms are positively charged and oxygen atoms are negatively charged. So when two hydrogen atoms combined with one oxygen atom, the molecule is formed, which is known as water. The formula for water is H2O. Okay. And it's a kind of polar molecule, means one end slightly positive and one end slightly negative. All the water like H2O, when we talk about H2O, is a formula for water. So it is having positively and negatively both the charges. So it is also known as polar molecule because in a same molecule there is a positive charge and there is a negative charge. Okay. Now moving to the next slide. So hydrogen bond, there is a bonding between different hydrogen atoms. Okay. The bonding between different hydrogen atoms results from the water's polarity. Polarity means it is having positive and negative charge. That's why the positive charge having a strong bond with the negative charge. So that is the way in which the entire water molecules are connected with each other. So this is having the major property. This is having very important property of water, having high heat capacity and universal solvent. Because of this polar property, because of this kind of structure, water is considered as having high heat capacity and universal solvent. Okay, so these are some basic properties of water. As all we know that water is very important for life on the earth. All living things need water. It is having majority of the body of organism, habitat for many organisms. It helps to regulate the climate also. Okay. And water is very important for shaping the earth surface. It is diluting and degrades the waste. Okay. So water is very important component on the earth surface, and it is one of the highly abundant feature on the earth surface. But as all we already discussed in the last class that fresh water source is very limited. Okay. So we need to work on the conservation, we need to work on the management of water resources so that each and every person on the earth will get a good water quality for drinking purpose. Okay. So about it is already discussed that about 90% of the earth's water is salty. Less than 1% of the planet's water is available that will be considered as fresh water, that is H2O. Okay. But this fresh water, how much water is available on the earth, is unevenly distributed over the earth surface. Okay. And it was expected that by 2025 one-third of the human population will live in the areas lacking the fresh water. Okay. So in future, like in near future, when we talk about year 2025, most of the people will not get the fresh water. So there is a high scarcity of the fresh water for the human population. So we need to conserve this precious water resource, this precious natural resource. Okay. So water is everywhere, but its comparison of the population size, it's very less. Although we can say that water is everywhere, but in comparison to the population size of the world, the fresh water, the availability of fresh water is very low. Only 7 countries accounts for the 60% of the global water availability. So these are the major continents. These are the continent-wise percentage of the water resources and the population. It is already discussed in the last class. The Asian countries is having high demand for water resources in comparison to their you can say the population is around 60% in the Asia is having 60% of the total world population, and but it is having only 36% of the water resources. Here water resources means we are talking about the fresh water sources. So you can see there is a large gap between the availability of fresh water and the total population size. African countries, they are having the same, European countries, North America and Central America. There is high water resources availability in comparison to the population size. And in South America and Caribbean countries, they are having a very high amount of water resources, fresh water resources, around 26% in comparison to their population, which is around 6.4%. So you can see that water is unevenly distributed over the earth. Some continent is having abundant of water, some continent is having lack of water. There is a lacking of fresh water, there is a lacking of water resources. So we need to work on that, so that each and every person, each and every individual on the earth will get the fresh water. Okay. So many countries in the Middle East, which has one of the world's highest population growth rate, face the water shortage. So as we all have heard that third world war will be for water. So it may be possible in near future that the third world war will be for water, because availability of water is shrinking. The water resources are shrinking day by day, and population is growing. Population growth is very fast in especially in Asian countries and Middle East countries, but they are having very less amount of the fresh water sources. So there may be some conflict, there may be some problem among the population of different countries. So there may be water war in the near future if we will not get good management strategy, if we will not have good conservation planning for the water resources. Okay. So as we know that most of the water in the dry region comes from the Nile river, okay, which is near to the Jordan. The countries are in the disagreement as to who has water rights. So currently there are no cooperative agreement for use of 158 of the world's 263 water basins that are shared by two or more countries. Okay. And there are water basins are available in the world, and that water basins are distributed between two countries or two or more countries. So there is always a conflict between different countries, that who has the right to use the water of that water basin, who has the right to water of that river. So that conflict may come in the form of war in near future, because each and every individual or each and every person need water for their daily use, but water resources are shrinking. The availability of water resources are shrinking day by day in comparison to the high growth rate of the population. Okay. So these are some common things. This is the hydrological cycle for the water resources. Like as we know that precipitation is one of the common form of water resources. All the liquid and solid precipitation continuously falls from the atmosphere to the land and ocean. And at the same time, there is a process of evaporation. Evaporation continuously moves the water vapor from the land and ocean to the atmosphere. So this is a hydrological cycle. Water comes on the earth's surface in the form of precipitation. It may be liquid or solid precipitation, and at the same time, parallelly, there is a evaporation process that continuously moves water vapor from the earth's surface, from the land or ocean into the atmosphere. So it's a hydrological cycle, and on the earth this hydrological cycle is very important to understand, to know how it is responsible for the availability of water on the earth surface. This hydrological cycle should work in a good manner, so that there may be the good amount of water, there will be good amount of water, fresh water resources on the earth surface. So this is the entire cycle of the hydrological process. And basically it is having two components which is important to know: precipitation and evaporation. Okay. This is another figure showing the water cycle. So here you see that a water cycle having multiple components. It starts from the condensation, then water storage in the atmosphere, then again the water storage will be converted in the form of precipitation, then it will be fall on the earth surface in case of snowfall, in case of water, in case of water vapor. There Then there may be infiltration. When water falls on the land surface, there may be infiltration that will goes to the underground, so it will be used for the underground water recharging. Then again this underground water recharge will move to the oceans, and then again there may be the evaporation process, and because of that evaporation process, the water vapor moves to the environment, moves to the atmosphere, and it will again fall in the form of rainfall, that is a precipitation on the earth's surface. So this is the entire water cycle, and this entire water cycle is responsible for the availability of water on the earth's surface. Okay, if it will not work properly, so there may be high scarcity of the water on the earth's surface. So we need to understand, we need to study the water cycle, and we also need to know what are the impacts of different climatic changes, what are the impacts of different climate changes scenarios on the water cycle. Okay, so surface water, as all we know that surface water includes streams, some major rivers, lakes, ponds, reservoirs, and wetlands. So all the water which is present on the earth surface is considered as the surface water, and surface water are the most important source for the water. It may include the streams, river, lakes, different ponds, reservoirs, and wetlands. Okay, and because of the surface runoff, when water run off from the surface, so it will be used to replenish the surface water, and that you can call it as a watershed. Watershed is one of the important factor that will be used to replenish the surface water, and its watershed is considered as an area of the land that is drained by a single water resource, or it is the watershed. Each and every river basin, each and every area on the earth is having some watershed. That watershed is responsible for replenishing the water in that basin or in that river. Okay, so surface water is very important. All the available water resources on the earth surface, what we can use for different purposes, household purposes and drinking purposes, industrial applications, industrial purposes, we need to use surface water. Okay, and moving to the next slide, groundwater is another term, like the supply of fresh water that can be found under the earth's surface, and that water may come from the recharging of the surface water. So there is a recharging of the water when water at the surface infiltrates into the ground. Okay, water on the earth surface will be infiltered, will be recharged, will be go inside. That will be responsible for the recharging of the underground water. And that underground water is stored in different aquifers, and it is again recharged into the rivers, springs, etc. Okay, so surface water and groundwater both are very important. Both are important or major source of fresh water for different applications. Okay, infiltration means it is a process of the water percolated through the soil into the cracks and the permeable rocks. When there is a rainfall in form of precipitation or any kind of water resource on the earth surface, when it per- percolated, the water percolated through the soil and the cracks in the rocks, or there may be permeable rocks. So water will be infiltrated into the ground, that will be stored in the as the form of underground water in the aquifers. So this is the infiltration process. Infiltration is very important. If we are having the soil, if we are having a rock which is having high infiltration rate, it means in that area there may be the good amount of underground water, there may be the good amount of water table under the earth. Okay, so in case of infiltration we are having two zone of aeration and zone of saturation. Zone of aeration means the upper soil layer that holds both and air water, and zone of saturation means the lower soil layers where all the spaces are filled with water. And third term, that is water table. Water table means the top of the zone of saturation. So here in this figure you can see this upper layer of the soil is considered as the zone of aeration, and the lower level of the soil, that is known as zone of saturation. Okay, and in between the top of the zone of saturation, okay, between the zone of aeration and between the zone of saturation, it is considered as the water table. So water table is a, you can say it's an intermediate zone between aeration and the saturation. So during the process of infiltration, first water goes into the zone of aeration, that is the upper layer of the soil, and it holds some amount of the air and water. And when it goes into the lower layer of that surface, that is known as zone of saturation, and all the water will be stored in the zone of saturation in the form of water table, or you can say the aquifers. The water stored in the zone of saturation in different aquifers, that is known as aquifer zone. So aquifer zone is very important. Aquifer zone should have good amount of water so it can be used for further application. So this is the process of infiltration. Okay, this is another example. This is another figure showing how the infiltration process is happening there. How what is the runoff? Okay, so during that infiltration process, water goes inside through the you can say the soil and rocks. That is a recharge zone. Recharge zones are the areas where water infiltrates into the aquifer. Okay, it's not that each and every place on the earth surface is not recharge zone. Each and every surface on the earth cannot be considered as a recharge zone. Recharge zones are only the areas where water can easily infiltrate into the aquifers, so that if it is not happening in that area, so there may be the slow rate of the recharging. If the surface is highly permeable, if the rock is highly permeable, so water can easily infiltrate into the underground. So in that case, there may be the good amount of the underground water. If the infiltration process is very low, rock is not permeable, there is a less amount of water can infiltrate into the surface or underground, then there may be the slow rate of the recharge. And presently, the groundwater is being removed faster than it can be replenished. Okay, we are extracting or we are retrieving the water from the underground, but the rate of recharge is very slow. That's the problem of the water scarcity. Water is recharging at a slow rate, but we are extracting water at a fast rate. So water cannot. There is a large gap. There is a large, you can say, difference between the water recharging process and the water extraction process. So presently, because of this difference, groundwater is being removed faster rate than it can be replenished because of the need of the water for the population. Population is increasing day by day. People will need water. Okay, so that's why they are extracting water at a fast rate. But on the other hand, the infiltration process is very slow. Recharging, the rate of recharge is very slow. So that is a problem for the water storage in the underground aquifers. Okay, so now moving to the next slide, what is the aquifer? As all we know that the aquifers are the porous layers of the sand, gravels, or rock laying behind the water table. Okay, you must have studied this aquifer in your previous semesters. It's a porous layer of the sand, it may be the gravel or any kind of rock that is lying below the water table. So all the aquifers will hold some amount of water. Water are stored in the aquifers. So it is very important to replenish the aquifers by infiltration process or by underground water recharging. Okay. So now, as we know that population is growing day by day because of the climatic changes, because of rapid changes in the atmospheric condition, there is also a negative impact of the water resources. Okay, so water resources are now facing many problems. In some cases, because of the flood, there is too much water. In case of drought, there may be the little water, or in some cases, there may be the poor quality water. So, three major problems for water resources are too much water in case of flood, then too little water in case of drought. Flood and drought both are directly or indirectly connected to the climate change. Both are directly connected to the change in the atmospheric condition, change in the climatic condition, rise in the temperature, and the problem in the weather circulation. And poor quality water, if there is a water is available, but because of some pollutants, because of some other factors, there is the poor water quality in that area. So these are three major problems that is related to the water resources. Now moving water stress, as we know that the best estimate of the share of the people in developing countries with access to the drinking water between 1970 to 2010. Water stress is another term, means as we know that population is increasing day by day and the people will need water in basically in most of the developing countries. So the need of the water is increased very high with respect to the population growth. Okay, with respect to the growing population. So that is having the stress on the water resources. Water stress means you can say that the high demand of water in comparison to the less availability of the water. So there is a high stress on the water, and the people living in countries, especially when we talk about developing countries, so they are not having access to the drinking water. So we need to have good drinking water. We need to provide good drinking water, and that may overcome the problem of water stress in that region. Water stress, so the concept of water stress is relatively simple, and according to the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, it applies to the situation where there is not enough water for all uses, whether agriculture, industrial, or domestic. When there is a scarcity of water, when there is lack of water for different agricultural uses, for different domestic uses, for different industrial uses, that condition is considered as the condition of water stress. So and here the threshold for stress in terms of available water per capita is more complex. However, in telling the assumptions about water use and its efficiency, nevertheless, it has been proposed that when annual per capita renewable fresh water availability is less than 1,700 cubic meters, the countries begin to experience periodic or regular water stress. Okay, and so the threshold for water availability is around 1,700 cubic meters. But if there is availability of water below 1,000 cubic meters, as per the per capita population, per capita uh, uh, person in that area, so water scarcity begins to hamper the economic development and human health and well-being. So basically, when we talk about water stress, if there is a fresh water availability less than, or if it is a fresh water availability less than 1,700 cubic meters, so it may be some periodic experience for the water stress. But when it goes below to 1,000 cubic meters, so water scarcity begins to hamper the economic development. So there is a, in case of ideal condition, there may be the water availability greater than 1,700 cubic meters. That is a annual water need per capita, and it can be considered as the good condition. It may be considered as ideal condition if there is availability of more than 1,700 cubic meters per capita water. And if it is below 1,000, then it will be considered as a water stress condition that may be negatively affect on the economic development and the human health and other well-beings. Okay, and surface runoff is also changing over the period of time because of the climatic change. And prior to 1970, about 10% of the storm water became runoff. Now 55% of the storm water is transported as runoff as development exceeds 75% of the permeable soil area. So there may be the very high rate of change in the surface runoff. That may be because of the climatic change. So we know that the when water is runoff, in case of rainfall, when the surface runoff is very fast, so the water cannot be used for different purposes. It will be wastage. There may be the wastage of the water in case of high runoff, high surface runoff. Okay, so that's the problem, that we cannot able to store the rainwater. We cannot able to store the water which comes in the form of precipitation. So this is the major challenge to work on the changes in the surface runoff. That is, prior to the 1970, it was around 10% of the runoff, but now it's increased up to 55% of the total runoff in case of storm water. Okay. So stormwater runoff, it's the greatest contributor to the non-point source pollution, contains nutrients, metals, suspended solids, pesticides, hydrocarbons, and microorganisms. Okay, the surface runoff is increased up to 55%. So because of this surface runoff, there may be different pollutants, different kinds of pollutants, different sources of the pollutants can also be mixed with the water. It may be some metal, it may be some suspended solids, pesticides that can be used in the agricultural lands, hydrocarbons, and different microorganisms. So presently, nearly 100% of the stormwater samples are mixed with some kind of pollutants or any suspended particles. Okay, in case of too much water in as all we know that in the recent time all the country, the entire India is facing high rainfall, heavy rainfall. Okay, in case of heavy rainfall there is a rapid snow melt, and that may be removal of the vegetation and destruction of the wetland that cause the flooding. Because of the heavy rainfall in most of the part in the country, they are facing the problem of flooding. So the flood plains, which usually include the high productive wetlands, helps to provide the natural food and erosion control, and that can maintain the high water quality and the recharge groundwater. So to minimize the floods, rivers have been narrowed with the leaves and walls and dammed to store the water. So these are some measures that can be considered, that can be taken into consideration to avoid or to minimize the effect of the flood in case of heavy rainfall. Okay. Several human activities are also responsible for flooding condition. Okay, in this figure you see there is a high rate of deforestation. So as the forest is cutted over that area, so it cannot hold the water which is coming from the heavy rainfall. So because of the high rate of deforestation, there is a you can say there is a there is high possibility of flood in that area. So in mountainous region or in hilly terrain, you see that there is a very dangerous situation in case of flood, because there is a high rate of deforestation, and in the presence of forest, in presence of vegetation, water cannot be hold on that surface, and it will be turned into the a high amount of water that can cause the flooding condition that may be responsible for many damages and deaths of the human life. Okay, so deforestation is one of the important factor for flooding condition. It's a kind of anthropogenic activities. Flooding, the anthropogenic activities are having important role in the flooding condition. Okay. In case of too little water, if there is a very less amount of rainfall, so in most of the arid and semi-arid regions on the earth, there is a problem of desertification and drought, because there is a very less amount of rainfall. So in such areas we need to work on the irrigation system. So irrigation required to produce the food, and for that we also need water. In case of very less amount of rainfall, there may be the problem of desertification and drought. But for getting the food or for agricultural practices, we need to have irrigation system. The irrigation system can be used to produce the food and agricultural productivity, and for that we need also water. So in case of high rainfall, there is a problem. In case of low rainfall or very less amount of rainfall, there is also problem. So in both the cases, water is having important role. So we need to work on some measures that can be taken into consideration to avoid the situation of heavy rainfall, or you can say for the availability of high water that is not used in constructive manner. It is a kind of destructive use of the water. And in case of very less amount of water, there is maybe also the problem for the agricultural practices that so we need also to work on the availability of water in that area. Okay, aquifer is depleting day by, there is a depletion in the aquifer. Okay, as we know that we are extracting the underground water at a fast rate, and it is not replenishing at that rate. So there is a problem in the aquifers. The aquifers are now shrinking. There is a depletion in the aquifer because of the rapid extraction of the underground water. So it lowers the water level, that may also cause the land subsidence. And there may be the salt water intrusion, and that salt water seeps into the fresh water that can occurring in the South Florida. So aquifer is also affecting by the rapid population growth. Aquifer is also having negative impact by the growing population. Because of the growing population, people need water. There is a need of water for growing population, so they are extracting the underground water at a fast rate. But aquifer is not replenishing at that rate. There is a less rate of underground water recharging, but the abstraction and extraction of the underground water is very fast. So there is also the negative impact on the aquifer. Okay, so moving to the next slide. Overdrawing surface waste. Okay, so damaging to the ecosystem. Wetlands are considered as an important component of the ecosystem, and overdrawing of the surface waters can damage the ecosystems. The wetlands can dry up. There is a stereas become too salty. The worldwide the demand for the water is growing as the human population is growing at a fast rate, and individual consumption continue to grow exponentially. Okay, the use of water is increasing very fast. Increasing exponentially. So it is also affecting the wetlands. It is also affecting the surface water. There is a overdrawing of the surface water that can damage the ecosystem of that area. That may be the problematic for different habitat. That may be the problematic for different you can say the life of different animals, different other creatures, different other organisms in that area. So in this figure you see, this is the figure showing how that wetland is uh, decreased. In the previous it was having high area with the wetland ecosystem, but right now after some days or after some year it is shrinked up to the certain level. So there is just high rate of shrinking of the wetlands because of the overdrawing surface water. Water management. Now for overcoming these problems we need to work on the water management. So the major objective or the goal of water management is the sustainable supply of the high quality of water that can be used for different purposes, different domestic use and industrial use. So how we do supply the water? For building the different dams, for diversion, for desalination. It's a very expensive. Desalination is very expensive task. In this we desalinize the sea surface, sea water. Okay, but it's a costly, it's expensive process. So we can work on the building of more dams. We can work on the diversion of different rivers. So it can be very much method to supply the water in the areas which is having lack of the water. Water conservation for agriculture. So there is a single largest user of the water worldwide. Agricultural practices need a high amount of water, large amount of water worldwide, and but most of the water is lost because of the evaporation process. So the solution for this problem is the drip irrigation. We should work on the drip irrigation system that may reduce the loss of water, that may reduce the loss of surface water uh, because of the evaporation and seepage. It is perforated pipes distribute water. It goes straight to the plants and it reduces the water use around 40 to 60%. So this is the figure showing the drip irrigation system. This drip irrigation system can reduce the loss of water around 40 to 60%, and it will perform the agricultural productivity. It will be used to improve the performance of agricultural productivity. It will increase the agricultural practices. So, and this is the best way to work on the water conservation for agricultural practices. Okay, so now water conservation for municipal uses, like the water which you will get, which you get in your house, that is supplied by the municipal corporation, and municipal corporation supplies the water that can be used for different domestic purposes, domestic use. Okay, the solution for the water conservation in case of urban area, we should use grey water. And education means we have to modify our habits. We should work on the less use of the water, and there is a water saving fixtures and applications. We should work on the repairing of the leaks in our taps, in our pipelines, in the houses or homes or society, and water gardens are required to that area to work on the water conservation. These are some solutions. By applying these solutions, we can easily work, we can easily conserve the water in case of urbanized area, in case of any municipal area, or in case of any city. Water pollution is another important factor that needs to be overcome, that needs to be taken into consideration when we work on the sustainable management of the water resources. So there may be the physical or chemical changes in the water quality that adversely affect the health of the human or organisms. If we are not using good quality water, if we are using the water having some turbidity or some pollutants, so that may negatively affect the human health, and that may also affect the organisms of the different organs in the human health. So this water pollution is a global problem. So we should also work on the solution for water solution, water eutrophication. It's a buildup of the nutrients in a body of water. Okay, we can artificially build the nutrients in the water that can naturally occur slowly, and the humans cause the imbalance by creating the pulses of the nutrients due to over fertilizing crops and the lawns and raising the animals in the confined areas. So eutrophication is a best way to replenish the water with the nutrients. That nutrients may include the nitrogen and phosphorus, that may contain different components of the phosphorus that are very much essential for the life in the small quantities, but may be harmful in case of excess use of that nutrients. Okay, this is another solution for improving the water quality. We can artificially mix some nutrients in the water, so the water quality will be improved in that area. Okay, these are the major sources of water pollution: point source and non-point source. Point source is a source of water pollution to a specific location. Non-point sources are a kind of water pollution that may enter over a large area. It's a kind of runoff during the agricultural practices. Because of the surface runoff from the agricultural land, it may mix some pesticides, it may mix some chemicals in the water, or there may be some atmospheric deposition of that harmful materials, harmful particles. So point source and non-point source. Point source means you know the specific location where it is polluting the water. Non-point sources you cannot predict, you cannot identify the non-point sources, and water can be polluted. There may be different kinds of pollutants that can be mixed with the water. It can enter from any uh, place. It may enter from agriculture, it may enter from different industries and other locations. These are the groundwater pollution sources. So you can see there are many sources which is responsible for the groundwater pollution. It may be industrial waste, it may be some domestic waste, it may be other agricultural pesticides, the pesticides used in the agricultural land that can also cause the water pollution. Industrial waste can also cause the water pollution. Okay, some domestic waste can also cause the water pollution. So this figure is showing different sources for the underground water pollution. Okay, so we need to reduce the use of pesticides in the agricultural land. We need to work on reducing the industrial waste that may not be allowed to mix with the water, that can affect the underground water quality. So how to control water pollution? How we can control this water pollution process? So the first we should reduce the source of the water pollution. There may be the pollution prevention. We should work on the cheapest and most effective way to reduce the pollution is to avoid producing it or releasing it into the environment. We should work on the reduction of the source that is responsible for the water pollution. We should work on the designing of the products that do not polluted the water. We should also work on the soil conservation. We should reduce the use of pesticides and other chemicals in the agricultural lands. So there may be the less amount of underground water pollution, and we should also work on the ban of the different pollutants, and there may be the provision of the rewarding purchasing environmentally preferable products. Okay, we should also purchase environment friendly products, so it may also reduce the water pollution. So these are some controlling factors that may be used for reducing the water pollution, that may be used for reduce the source of different pollutions to that water. And moving to the next slide. So this is the projected scenario of the water scarcity worldwide in 2025. So you see the red area, the red patches, the portion having red color is having high, there is a possibility of high water scarcity by 2025. So you see here most of the part of the India and China, some part of the China and Russia, some part of the African countries, they are going to face a high water scarcity in 2025, whereas this American continent and South American countries having very less amount of water scarcity by 2025. This is the global perspective of the projected water scarcity by the year 2025. So there is an alarming situation, and in future we can also face some kind of water scarcity, lack of the good quality drinking water, good quality water for different uses, domestic uses, agricultural uses. So we should work on the water conservation. We should work on the sustainable management of the water resources so it can be used for the future generation, and the water is available at a good amount in good quality for the future generation for different uses. Thank you very much for today's class, and we will meet again in the next class for with next lecture. Thank you.